So it's now my honor and pleasure to welcome this year's Convocation speaker, Colorado State Senator and HGSE alumnus Mike Johnston. Few of us have had the opportunity to see education from as many vantage points as Mike Johnston has, from the classroom to the principal's office, from the state senate to President Obama's transition team, from education law to education policy, and as an author and a social entrepreneur, there isn't much that Mike hasn't seen or done in education. It's especially for this reason that I'm delighted to have him here today to address the class of 2014, who will soon be leaving Appian Way for a similarly diverse set of roles in the broad field of education. Like many of you, Mike began his career in education as a young teacher in an area of great need and high poverty. He taught high school English in Greenville, Mississippi through the Teach for America program. And also, like many of you, his experiences in the classroom made him eager to continue his own education and to effect positive change for students on a large scale. He chose to continue his studies at HGSE in what was then the Education Policy and Administration program. While a student, he found time to work on his book, In the Deep Heart's Core, published in 2002, which is a powerful account of the educational inequities and the devastating effects of poverty he saw firsthand in Greenville. Alongside several classmates, he also helped to develop and launch a new nonprofit called New Leaders for New Schools, which is now well established and recruits, prepares, and places outstanding urban school leaders. He continues to serve on the board of directors. 14 years ago, Mike sat in the seats where you are sitting, energized, optimistic, and ready to take on more. From Appian Way, his journey took him to Yale Law School, where he studied ways to use law as a lever for education reform. He then returned to his native Colorado, where he became a principal at 2 alternative high schools, serving Colorado students held in state custody or living in group homes and detention centers. By then, Mike was also serving as an education policy advisor to political candidates in Colorado and beyond. In 2005, he became the founding principal of the Mapleton Expeditionary School of the Arts, or MESA, a redesigned urban high school in the Mapleton Public Schools. Mike's innovative work at MESA caught the attention of Senator Barack Obama, who not only gave a major campaign speech on education at Mike's school, but also named him as a top education advisor to his presidential campaign. In 2009, Mike was elected to his first term as Colorado State Senator representing Northeast Denver. In a characteristic move, he soon set up a community office in a poor neighborhood, becoming the first state senator to open a district office. For those of us steeped in debates and conversation about education equity and how we can create policies that help to improve educational outcomes for all students, including the most disadvantaged ones, Mike Johnston is a household name. He's been at the forefront of initiatives in Colorado to invest in early childhood education, reform school finance laws, and somewhat controversially, to tie teacher evaluation to student performance. He has successfully helped pass legislation that improves access to higher education for undocumented students, and most recently has succeeded in securing funding for early childhood and literacy programs. In doing so, he has become well known for his ability to build coalitions and to work alongside partners to take on persistent and complex challenges that few politicians have the courage to address. And perhaps most impressively, he's done all this while raising twin boys and a daughter with his wife, Courtney. Mike has gained national attention for his work on education issues. In 2011, Time magazine ranked Mike among the top 40 under 40 rising political stars, and Forbes magazine listed him as one of the most 7 influential educators in 2010. And no pressure, Mike, but he's also become well known in the field for his moving and powerful speeches on education. I suppose that isn't too surprising for a former English teacher who is as passionate and outspoken on education issues as Mike is. Please join me now in welcoming Senator Mike Johnston.
Thank you so much for having me. in this weather, this is almost as good an assignment as speaking to a class of students right before lunch, right? It's like the single worst thing to try to do. I will say for those graduates who are looking for jobs right now, it just might be worth noting that in Colorado we have 300 days of sunshine a year. Just putting that out there. Which is why I came fully prepared for today's speech with these. So I clearly would not need. The dean told me he was wearing long johns, which was a better choice than my sunglasses. Thank you so much again for having me. I do want to start with one serious note and I hope a joyful note, which is I think the world lost one of its great teachers today, in Maya Angelou. And I was thinking of her because she has given some of the most moving and incredible, not only speeches, but written some of the things that have most shaped my life. And so I just wanted to share one with you, which is a theme that Professor Mapp talked about that I'll actually raise too, which is a short quote on love. And she says, "Love recognizes no barriers. It jumps, hurdles, leaps fences, penetrates walls to arrive at its destination full of hope." And so I thought about asking for a moment of silence, but I thought Maya Angelou would never want a moment of silence. So I think what I'll ask for is a moment of love, which is take a minute and hug the person next to you or shake their hand or give them a moment to be thankful for what they have done for you. Excellent. Maya would be happy. If you didn't know that person sitting next to you, I apologize for that. However, if anything does come of it, I would love to be invited to the wedding. So, thank you. Okay, well, so in that spirit, you all have just completed an incredibly rigorous course of study, and you have been steeped in the research and the policy and the evidence that builds the foundation for all the things we care about, for what we do and why we do it. And so in honor of that, I want to take a short break from that today and actually say, let's take a minute and step back and actually talk about what are the values, what are the fundamental values that undergird the work that we do and why we take it on. And for me, there is no better lighthouse for those values than the kids themselves. And so I want to today just share a couple of stories about the kids who've come into my life since I walked off this stage 14 years ago, and a little about the lessons that they've taught me along the way, and a little about how I hope maybe that those shape what you now carry out into this profession that you're poised to shape. So whenever I started faculty meetings as a principal, I would always start with all of our team standing in a circle. I debated asking you all to do that today, but I thought it might take up most of my speech to do that, so I'm not going to. But what I always do is when people stand in a circle, they'll get in a circle, and then I'll start by saying, now take 2 steps in. Because people always stand in a circle, and they leave a lot of space between them and the person next to them, right? And I take 2 steps in until you are close enough that you can actually feel the shoulder of the person on either side of you. If you can't move, you're at the right spot. That makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable, generally. And that's when I say, this shoulder you feel on either side is a reminder to you that this is a human business. This is not work that's done across a desk or in a boardroom. It is work that is done shoulder to shoulder with people who care about the same things that you do. And when you feel that shoulder on your right and on your left, know that shoulder is one that you're probably going to lean on, you're probably going to cry on, some small child is probably going to snot on at some point. But as a reminder that A, you don't do this alone, and B, you do this with people, for people, of people. And so you can't do the circle, but if you can, snuggle in a little closer to the people next to you so you feel those shoulders, and it will also have the benefit of keeping you warm today, which will help. And the first story I want to tell you is about a student of mine named Raquel. And the story of how Raquel's parents met is one of my favorite stories. And Raquel's mom and dad met in a bathroom in college. And you think this story is going in a whole different direction, and some of you might have stories like this one, but this is not that story. Raquel's parents met in the bathroom in college because Raquel's mom was cleaning that bathroom in college. And Raquel's dad was there repairing the broken stall. Raquel's mom was a very recent immigrant from Mexico, broken English, who was working a job as a janitor, and her job was to clean the bathrooms at the University of Colorado. Her dad was North Denver, working kind of odd jobs in construction, and they had a broken stall, and so there they were, ending up in a bathroom together while the students waited outside holding their shampoo and their towels. And through her broken English, Raquel's dad managed to invite her mom out for coffee. And the rest is history. They have 3 kids. Raquel is the second of those children, and she has a perfect combination of her parents. She has her mom's native Spanish accent and high cheekbones, and she has her dad's sort of sunshine blonde hair and Irish blue eyes. And so when she gets to 2nd or 3rd grade on one of the early assessments her parents get back, they find she has some real talent and some real skills in English and math, and they refer her for more assessments, and she is identified for an additional sort of rigorous course of study in what we used to call gifted and talented. And for the first time, Raquel's mom and dad developed this dream that someday their little girl might actually be the one in that bathroom waiting with the shampoo and the towel to get in, and not the one inside waiting to get out. So she pursues a course of study, does great through middle school and high school, committed athlete, 3 sports. Her mom still gets up every morning at 3 a.m. to go clean bathrooms. And so Raquel takes advantage of that and gets up with her and gets dropped off at school at 5 a.m. And so she's there to run extra laps of track before any of the rest of the kids get there. If there's a random football coach or a basketball coach to open the gym, she'll be there to just run another hour of workouts as a way to get a little more ready. Still dreaming she might someday get to the University of Colorado, where her parents have spent their lives working. So it gets to junior year, senior year comes, she gets her ACT score back, and she's ready to apply to the University of Colorado, and one of her teachers sits her down and says, Raquel, have you looked at your ACT score? Have you ever thought that you could apply to some of the most selective colleges in the country? And Raquel, who was never even sure she belonged on the student side of the bathroom at the University of Colorado, certainly didn't believe she belonged at Harvard or at Yale or at Stanford. She sat down with those numbers and sat down with those teachers, and after she put in her application to the University of Colorado, she did something crazy. She put in 10 more applications to some of the best colleges in the country. And a week ago, I was out at Stanford Law School speaking, and after that speech, I got to sit down and have coffee with Raquel, who just finished her first year at Stanford. And she is the head of El Centro Hispano there. She is preparing to spend 8 weeks in Ecuador, where she'll teach young students how to both speak English and speak Spanish. She has a 4.0 GPA. She is on the polo team, and she is very proud of the fact that she cleans her own bathroom. But I tell you that story because one of the things that it reminded me sitting in that little cafeteria with the student, it's so amazing. She's like a grown-up, they're talking, having a crepe. It was fantastic. And she's telling me what's good on the menu. And what makes it so compelling for me is that students like Raquel have a fundamental right to know. The fundamental right to know. And I think about it as the only essential ingredient for power is information. And history is testimony to the truth that the most powerful tool of oppression is ignorance. It is why we teach young people to read. So they are no longer passive recipients of information. They are actually scientists and not beakers. Right? They're authors and not words. They are artists and not canvas. But that fundamental right to know is a right to know early and often how they were doing and what they can do to do better. And it's how they compare not just to kids around the corner, but to kids around the world. And not just for the stories in which those moments are hopeful, not just for Raquel, in which that knowledge opens up whole new worlds they never had the space to dream before, but for the hard truths, that's also true also. Right? For my own boys, when we found out that they were 4, that they had reading delays, right? That information is powerful for us because it gives us the chance to choose, to take back our own ownership over their education. And I think this is true not just for kids, it's also true for parents, it's true for grown-ups, it's true for adults in our work, which is we have to defend fundamentally the right to know. The right to know how we're doing, how we can improve, how we can get better. And then that's why I think teachers and leaders have the right to get that feedback early, get that feedback often, and be able to make decisions off of those. At the end of the day, whether Raquel chooses CU or chooses Stanford doesn't make a bit of difference. Whether a teacher or a leader chooses to seek a mentor on their own staff or take a course online doesn't make a bit of difference. Whether I choose to get my boys into sort of intensive reading support or whether I believe they're going to grow out of it with time doesn't make a difference. Some of us in this room might think either of those is the right decision. What matters is that we have the information to make that decision. Because once we have that information, we own it. And we have the power now to build our own path. To those that argue that, well, knowing that a child can't read never taught them how to read, I agree. I agree deeply. It is the first and indispensable step. There's a great moment in 1966 when they call on Meet the Press. They summon all of the leaders of the civil rights movement. And so Dr. King is there, and Stokely Carmichael and Roy Wilkins, folks with real disagreements about the strategy going forward. And the moderator says to Dr. King, Dr. King, do you actually believe that these marches, these sort of dangerous, disruptive, sometimes deadly marches, do they actually change anything? Dr. King says, I have never felt that demonstrations could actually solve the problem. They call attention to the problem. They dramatize the existence of social ills that could be very easily ignored if you did not have demonstrations. And the initial reaction to demonstrations is always negative. Although certainly no one would blame the physician for using his instruments and his skills and his know-how to reveal any certain condition to a patient, when we confront those moments of information, our first response is often to be afraid. That's not a reason to stop. That's a reason to take the information and make decisions with it. So with that right to know, what do we do next? I want to tell you a short story about a student of mine named Flavio. Flavio was a student that started middle school at the school that I founded in Denver. And when he came to us, Flavio wasn't the most successful student, very charismatic, very funny, great sense of humor, always engaging in conversation, but had not really found his place in education that he believed he had a real chance there until he had an amazing early high school teacher who got him engaged, got him invested in science and medicine. He did a summer program at the CU School of Medicine and decided actually this might be a profession for him. I remember for almost a year after that, his screensaver on his phone was the picture of him in his scrubs from that summer. A vision of himself in a world that he might one day inhabit. Picks up his grades from the not great place where they started, successfully graduates, applies to college, gets admitted to college, and it's at that moment when we're trying to figure out where he's going to go and how he's going to pay for it that he sits down and says, Mr. Johnston, I need to talk to you about this, and I'm not proud about it. And I said, Flavio, what is it? And he said, Mr. Johnston, I'm undocumented, and without that legislation that would have allowed me to go to college at a regular tuition rate, there's no way I can pay this tuition. I can't go. And I said, Flavio, why didn't you tell me that? And he said, it's not a story I like to tell. He said, he's given me permission to tell it now, so don't worry. He said, I lived in Juarez in Mexico, and I don't know how much you know about Juarez, but my town was run by the cartel. And my dad and my uncle were two of those people who believed that the cartel shouldn't run our town, and so they stood up and they said that. And they came and murdered my dad and my uncle. And my mom decided she wasn't going to stick around to wait for them to find us. So she put us in a car and we drove and we drove and we drove until we got to Colorado. And since then, we've been trying to apply for citizenship. We've been trying to apply for amnesty. We've been working on it for 7 years, but there's still no progress. So Flavio graduated and he waited. He waited while I made the promise to him that we would try to pass that bill in the legislature, and we failed. And he waited while we tried a second time, and we failed again. And then one day he texted me, and Flavio said, Mr. Johnston, I got a letter in the mail. You won't believe it. But the US government has sent me a letter, and they've said I'm now cleared to be able to apply for citizenship. All I have to do is go back to Juarez and wait there. And I am, of course, furious, and who do we call, and what institution do we tear down, and how could they possibly send you into a place that is so dangerous? There's no way you're going. And he says, hey, Mr. Johnston, calm down. This is worth it. He says, I am not afraid of going. Not because I'm some sort of Superman or I believe I'm invincible, but because my whole life when I was in school, I felt like it never really mattered what I did. Because even if I got ready for school, I never was going to have the power to decide. I wouldn't have the power to choose college or the power to choose a career. So why do all that work? He's like, now I know that I can actually do the work and complete the work, but what I don't have is the actual power to make my own choice. It's like if I go there and I get my papers and I come home, I'll have that power. That'll be worth it for me. That'll be worth it for my kids. And since his strategy was better than my strategy, was complain and stomp our feet, we agreed and he went. And cell phone didn't work there. Facebook always works. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. So we kept in touch by Facebook. And Flavio, with a .38 pistol in his belt, spent the night in doorways and in spare bedrooms and in shacks or neighbors' houses he could find for 1 month and 2 months and 3 months, hoping that the US government would process the paperwork faster than the cartels in Juarez would find him. And 4 months and 5 months and 6 months. And after 6 months, I finally get a text back on my phone from Flavio, and it says, I'm home. And we were going to get together to eat lunch. I was so looking forward to it. And then he sends me another text. He says, Mr. Johnston, I just want to tell you something, and I don't want you to be disappointed. Okay. And he says, I've made a decision. I've decided I'm not going to go to college yet. I've decided to join the U.S. Army. I'm shocked. And he says, before you say anything, I just want you to know I've decided to do that because I want to give something back to the country that has given me so much. And when I think about all the teachers, you and Mr. Espinoza and others who always had my back no matter what I needed, I want you to know that I will always have your back whenever you need it. The most surprising and simple and profound act of gratitude I had ever seen. And what astounds me about Flavio is that in the moments when things seemed the most broken, all that he needed was the power to decide. If you have the right to know, if kids have information about what they're able to do, and they have the power to make decisions, that power to decide is invigorating. And so you've done this in your own work, right? Your decision on your concentrations, on your partners, on your careers, on your jobs, are all the small decisions you make that build a picture of yourself as a full human being. And in this work and in our work ahead, we have to return to educators and to parents and to students the power to decide. For educators or for students and for parents, that often means the power to decide on their school. But for educators, I think we are coming out of an era for too long where we have lost the power to decide. Without preserving for educators the power to decide, I think we risk suffocating the very things that brought us into this work. I think you must lead us out of a world of compliance and into a world of creation. In a place where educators have the power to decide on how they seek their own professional development, on how they build their schools and cultures and communities, on how they make the decisions on the most important one of who has the privilege to work alongside them and to work for the kids in front of them. These powers to decide are what make the work worth doing as long as we preserve them. And I think in this world, clear standards and clear expectations are not constraints, they're invitations. So T.S. Eliot has a famous quote, which is, free verse is never truly free to the great poet. And the converse is also true, right? Which is metered verse is never really constrained to the great poet. Meter is a lens, the same way that social studies is a lens, or mathematics is a lens, or language arts is a lens. It is an area in which you have the power to decide, the power to create something beautiful, something enduring, something engaging for kids. And I think that has to be a part of what we do now. Let me close with this. We must have the right to know for our kids, for our stakeholders, for our parents. We must have the power to decide, not just for kids, but for educators. But I think those two might be enough. In most professions, they're not in ours. I think there is something else without which you probably won't make it. And that's my last story, which is about a young man named Jerome. My wife and I went to the ed school together, graduated together, so the whole person you just hugged thing is a real risk. After we graduated, she was in what was then called the Risk and Prevention Program, which is now, I think, the Human Development and Psychology Program. Woo woo! Shout out from. And when she left, she went back to Atlanta, and she became a caseworker in Atlanta, and she worked for the Department of Family and Child Services, and she did foster care placements for adolescents. And for folks in that program and in that world, you know it is very, very hard to find permanent placements for a 15-year-old boy. There are not a lot of folks signing up to adopt 15-year-old boys. A lot of people with 15-year-old boys are putting them up for adoption. That's a separate issue. And so my wife went down there, and she met this young man named Jerome. And Jerome was about 16 when she started working with him, but he was about 7 when he was homeless for the first time. His mom was addicted to crack and did all of the kind of things that people do when they are addicted to drugs. And she prostituted, and she would go missing for days on end. And Jerome, when he was about 7, learned that when it got cold and the night came, it was time to start looking for a place to sleep because you didn't know if mom was coming back. So at about 7, one night he decided to stop sleeping on the streets, and he saw a little hotel close by, snuck in, and waited for when the housekeeper went to clean the room. And when she snuck in to replace the towels, he snuck in behind her, hid behind the door, and when she left and the door closed, he would slide under the covers and have a warm bed for the night. And did that at 8 and 9 and 10, started moving up the hotel chains. And then at age 10, his mother died of AIDS. And he went through his teens between homelessness and between foster care placements. By the time Courtney got to know him at 15, he had been living on the streets for almost 7 years. And as a sign of that, I'm not kidding, when I went to Atlanta, I was interviewing for a job down there, and I was very excited because they were putting me up at the Four Seasons. And I'd never stayed at the Four Seasons before. So of course, Courtney leaves her house and comes over to stay at the hotel with me. And on the way, we're driving and with Jerome, and Jerome's in the car. And Jerome says, "So where are you staying?" I say, "I'm staying at the Four Seasons." And he says, "What floor are you on?" And I say, I'm on the 5th. He's like, "Oh, all the best suites are on the 12th floor." I was like, how is that possible? This guy would have been an incredible travel agent. But he had far outstripped all of my knowledge of Atlanta hotels and his own sort of commitment to survival. So Courtney helped get him placed. He was stable for a couple of years. He came to our wedding, and it was in our wedding when we got married. I remember it well because he had the hotel room above me, and he and his date left the bathroom water running, and so my entire room was flooded the morning of my wedding from Jerome's room. But about 3 years later, we got a call, and Jerome had taken a turn for the worse, and like his mom, had been on the streets, and like his mom, needed to find a way to support himself, and had turned to prostitution in the process, and had gotten into a room with a man who wanted him to do something that he didn't want to do, and they got into a fight, and there was a gun involved, and the man was killed. And Jerome called us to let us know he was facing first-degree murder charges. And it broke my wife's heart. And she went down there and testified in his behalf, spent a couple of days, and she was on the flight home when the jury came in and found him guilty and sentenced him to life without parole at age 22. And normally now it's on Sundays about 3 o'clock when the phone rings, and I pick it up and they say, "This is the Georgia Department of Corrections, will you accept a collect call?" And I say, "Yes." And the voice on the other end of the line says, "Hey, is mom there?" because my wife is the closest thing to a mom that Jerome has ever had. And the hardest calls are the ones that come in the middle of the week from a random unknown phone number in Atlanta, and I'll answer it and I'll say hello, and I'll say, hey, this is Jerome. Can I talk to mom? I got a cell phone. And I'll hand it to her, and after they get off the phone, and my wife will always cry after those calls, and I say, do you miss him? And she says, yeah, I miss him, but mostly my heart breaks to think about what he had to do to get that cell phone. And then we walk out on the porch and sit down with our 3 kids and teach them to ride a bike, and we know that Jerome is in handcuffs and a jumpsuit being walked back to his little cell where he will spend the rest of his life. And I tell you that story because you are about to take on, over the course of your life, you are going to step up to be moms and dads to hundreds, even thousands of kids who are going to need you more than they've ever needed anyone before. And those kids are going to break your hearts in all sorts of ways that you can't even imagine yet. You are going to go to weddings, and you're going to go to funerals. You are going to go to parent-teacher conferences, and you are going to go to rehab centers. But at those moments when they break your heart the most, in those moments is when they are going to need you the most. And I am so proud to be a 4th-generation teacher. And I am so proud that after so much has changed in this profession, one thing has remained enduringly the same, which is at the heart of this work is about the will to love. It is about the will to love, and the will to love those kids who need you the most in the moments when you think you have nothing left to give. In those moments where you are going to take your heart and break it up to 180 little pieces and stuff it into a backpack every day to take home. And for some kids who don't have backpacks, you'll stuff it into lunch boxes. And for kids who don't have lunch boxes, you'll stuff it into their little grubby jean pockets where they know they won't lose that little piece of your heart that they're going to need in the moments when nobody else is there. And so I just want to ask you to bring that will to love to the work. And not just to the kids, but to the adults. I have yet to meet a practitioner or a policymaker or a parent who wants their kids to fail or wants their kids to drop out of high school. I think those images are paranoias. Those are not people. What we have to do is to realize that we share the same goal and that we only differ on how to reach it. That does not mean we have to agree on all things. It means we should always be mindful of how much energy we spend fighting each other versus how much energy we spend fighting the real enemies of injustice and inequality that continue to run rampant. So I am going to ask you to call on that will to love first. And when you have a teacher that you disagree with, or a principal that you disagree with, or a policymaker that you disagree with, talk to her first and not about her. Not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's actually the productive thing to do. To reach out first to those who I disagree with has always tried to be a rule for me, not just in the last 2 days here, but in the work that I do in Colorado. What I have found overwhelmingly is that I have grown more and changed more in those moments than any others. So I think the sound of the choir makes us dance, but the words of the critics make us grow. And so returning to the table to restart a hard conversation with folks who you disagree with never means that you're losing. It means that you're listening. If you are right, you have nothing to fear. If you are wrong, you have nothing to lose. But if you are there, listening, you have something to learn. So treat each other and treat everyone on this journey with you with the tenderness you would treat Jerome. Not 25-year-old Jerome when he's walking back to the cell, but 7-year-old Jerome when he is trying to find a warm bed to sleep in so it's not cold outside and scary. We all have our own walks back to our cells. We'd all rather be loved than be left. And we all need, in those moments of greatest weakness, that support from the will to love. And so the right to know, the power to decide, the will to love. Those are, I think, what Raquel and Flavio and Jerome would share back with you now if they were here today. And that's what I offer you as things to think about that might characterize the profession that you are going to build and the world you're going to lead us into. And let me just close with this last thought, which is right now on this campus, today and tomorrow, there are convocations in multiple schools on this campus. Right? There is the School of Government, there is the School of Law, there is the School of Business. And all of us share commitment to, I think, what is maybe the oldest and boldest promise that any people have ever made. And that promise is we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. And there have been moments in time when each of those disciplines made invaluable contributions to that battle. Certainly, the School of Law brought us the call for equality in Brown versus Board. Certainly, the School of Government brought us the Civil Rights Act, or the legislation that has tried to make it possible for folks to build lives out of poverty. Certainly, the School of Business has helped develop technology that's made it more possible for people to connect and get access to content in rural and poor parts of the world. Those are all true. But those institutions have all brought us to the moment we are in now, which is a world in which our kids are equal in the eyes of the law, but unequal in their own hearts, unequal in the own vision of what they see in front of them. And the final work to be done will only be done from this school. There is no law that can force a child to discover the wonder of mathematics. Only a teacher can do that. There is no technology that can convince a kid not to drop out of high school when he wants to do that. Only a teacher can do that. There is no judge who can order a child against all evidence to the contrary to fundamentally believe in herself, to persevere. Only a teacher can do that. And so now it falls to us, as maybe the proudest and most passionate of American patriots, to finish the work that has been done, that has been started. And not to deliver that promise from the butt of a gun, not to deliver it with the pound of a gavel, not to deliver it with a speech from the well of the Senate, but to deliver it with a book on a beanbag with our little babies. The promise we've all been built for. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That can only be delivered by an American educator. The right to know, the power to decide, the will to love. It's up to you now to lead us there. Good luck and Godspeed.